In my family, I was always the disappointment. While my older brother Anthony collected accolades, prestigious degrees, and our parents' endless praise, I was the one who never quite measured up. For 32 years, I lived with the weight of being the family failure. That is until last Christmas, when Anthony proudly gathered everyone in our parents' living room to reveal the findings of a private investigator he had hired to expose just how much of a loser I truly was. The smirk on his face as he handed out those manila folders to our stunned family is something I will never forget. Neither is the look that replaced it when everyone realized what the investigation had actually uncovered. Before I reveal how my brother's plan to humiliate me completely backfired, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you have ever been underestimated by your own family. I grew up in Wellesley, Massachusetts, in a sprawling colonial home that my father, a third-generation investment banker, was immensely proud of. Our family name appeared on buildings at 2 Ivy League universities and in the donor lists of Boston's most prestigious cultural institutions. Image was everything to the Prestons. Success was not just expected, it was the minimum requirement for familial love. From the day Anthony was born 4 years before me, he seemed designed for this environment. He walked early, talked early, and by kindergarten was already reading at a third-grade level. Our childhood home was a shrine to his achievements, shelves lined with debate trophies, walls covered with academic certificates, and a special cabinet in the living room, dedicated to his Harvard acceptance letter framed like a precious artifact. I was different from the start. School was a constant struggle. Words jumbled on the page, and I could never focus during lectures, no matter how hard I tried. My report cards were a parade of C's and D's, with teacher comments always noting my potential if only I would apply myself. What none of us knew then was that I had undiagnosed ADHD, something I would discover on my own in my 20s. Why Cannot You Be More Like Anthony became the soundtrack of my childhood. While he captained the lacrosse team to state championships, I was cut from junior varsity. When he became class president, I was sent to detention for doodling circuitry designs during history lectures. The day Anthony was accepted to Harvard on a partial academic scholarship, my parents threw a party that drew 100 guests. The same week I was called to the principal's office for hacking into the school's grading system, not to change grades, but to prove it could be done. The Preston name means something in this community, my father would lecture me. Your brother understands that. When will you? By the time Anthony graduated summa cum laude and secured a position at Goldman Sachs, the pattern was set. He followed our father's footsteps into investment banking, married Catherine, a poised Dartmouth graduate from another old Boston family, and quickly produced 2 perfect children with his strong jaw and her blue eyes. My rebellion, if you could call it that, was less dramatic than most. I simply refused to pretend to be someone I was not. When I was accepted to Boston University, not Harvard, my parents barely acknowledged it. When I switched my major from economics to computer science, my father threatened to cut my funding. And when I dropped out in my junior year to work on a cybersecurity project that fascinated me, he made good on that threat. You are making the biggest mistake of your life, he told me as I packed my belongings. Without a degree, you will amount to nothing. Anthony stood in the doorway of my childhood bedroom, arms crossed, a mixture of pity and satisfaction on his face. He is not wrong, Bradford. This family has a legacy to uphold. What exactly do you think you are going to accomplish on your own? With $2,000 saved and a backpack of clothes, I moved to Seattle, as far from Boston as I could reasonably go while staying in the continental United States. I found a tiny apartment with 3 roommates and took a job at a local tech support company while working on my own projects at night. I told my family I was working in tech support, which was technically true if deliberately vague. What I did not tell them was that 6 months after arriving in Seattle, my cybersecurity algorithm caught the attention of a venture capitalist who had experienced a devastating data breach the year before. He offered $300,000 in seed funding to develop my ideas into a real security product. Within 18 months, we had our first major client. By year 3, we were profitable and expanding rapidly. But every Christmas, I would fly back to Boston, drive a modest rental car to whatever lavish gathering my parents were hosting, and endure the same questions. Still doing that computer repair thing? When are you going back to finish your degree? Have you considered that Anthony might be able to find you something at his firm, even in the mailroom? Anthony, now with a corner office and a 7-figure salary, would invariably give me a firm handshake and a 20-minute monologue about his latest professional triumph or property acquisition. His wife, Catherine, would ask if I was seeing anyone special with the practiced sympathy of someone addressing a terminal patient. Their children were trained to call me Uncle Bradford, but taught nothing else about me worth asking about. I never corrected their assumptions. I never mentioned that my computer repair thing had evolved into Preston Secure, a cybersecurity firm valued at over $300 million. I never talked about my waterfront home on Lake Washington, or the fact that I had been profiled in Wired magazine under my professional name, B.J. Preston, which no one in my family ever read. Why maintain the charade? At first it was self-preservation. I needed to prove to myself that I could succeed on my own terms. Then it became an experiment. Would my family ever value me without external validation? Would they ever take interest in my happiness rather than my status? Year after year I got my answer. They would not. And so it continued this strange double life until last Christmas when everything changed. The annual Preston family Christmas reunion was held at my parents' Hamptons estate, a property so unnecessarily large that it required a staff of 8 to maintain. I arrived in my usual rental car, a mid-sized sedan that Anthony always managed to comment on. "Budget constraints again this year, Brad?" he asked as I pulled up his own Mercedes G-Wagon gleaming in the circular driveway alongside my father's Bentley. Something felt different from the moment I arrived. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Relatives I barely spoke to suddenly wanted to know specific details about my work. My cousin Abigail, after 3 glasses of my father's expensive Cabernet, said something odd. "You know, someone was asking about you at my firm. Some investigator type. Is everything okay?" My brother seemed particularly pleased with himself, constantly smirking in my direction and whispering to our father, who would then look at me with an expression I could not quite read. At one point I caught Anthony taking photos of my modest luggage and rental car keys when he thought I was not looking. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I used my security background to do a little investigating of my own. Anthony had never been particularly careful with his passwords, and his iPad was still using the same one from college, the name of his first girlfriend, with his Harvard graduation year. Within minutes, I found a series of emails between him and Marshall Stevens, one of the most high-profile private investigators on the East Coast, known for his work with wealthy clients dealing with extortion attempts and business rivals. The emails confirmed my suspicions. Anthony had hired Stevens 6 months earlier to investigate every aspect of my life in Seattle. His initial request was clear: I need comprehensive documentation of my brother's failures. Employment history, living conditions, debt, everything. Our family needs to stage an intervention before he wastes any more of his life on this tech support fantasy. My first instinct was anger, then a strange sense of relief. The charade was about to end one way or another. The question was how I wanted it to play out. Should I confront Anthony directly, reveal my success, before he could try to humiliate me, or let the situation unfold on its own terms? I chose the latter. If Anthony wanted a show, I would let him have his moment in the spotlight before it backfired spectacularly. The next day brought more strange behavior. My mother asked if I was eating regularly, her eyes scanning my modest but designer watch that none of them recognized as costing more than Anthony's ostentatious Rolex. My father inquired about my living situation with unusual concern about whether my apartment had adequate heating. Dinner that evening was an elaborate affair catered by a chef from a Michelin-starred restaurant in the city. As we sat around the massive dining table, Anthony dominated the conversation as usual, detailing his recent promotion and the new summer home he and Catherine were building in the Berkshires. "Of course, not everyone can be so fortunate," he said, his eyes sliding to me. "Some of us have to make do with more modest goals." "Right, Bradford. We all make our choices," I replied neutrally, sipping my water. "Indeed," my brother continued, "but sometimes people delude themselves about their situation, living in fantasy rather than facing reality. Throughout the meal, I noticed a thick manila envelope beside Anthony's plate that he kept touching as if to reassure himself it was still there. His confidence grew with each passing course, his comments becoming increasingly pointed. When dessert was served, Anthony tapped his glass with a spoon. "I would like to propose a toast," he announced, standing. "To family, to truth, and to finally facing reality, no matter how uncomfortable it might be." He stared directly at me as everyone raised their glasses in confused agreement. After dinner, Anthony suggested we all gather in the living room for an important family discussion. My parents exchanged glances but nodded their approval. As everyone settled into the expensive furniture, Anthony remained standing, positioning himself in front of the fireplace like a prosecutor before a jury. "Family means everything to the Prestons," he began his voice, taking on the same self-important tone he used in his corporate presentations, which is why it pains me to report that one of us has been living a lie, misleading all of us about the state of his life, and refusing to accept the help he so clearly needs. All eyes turned to me. My brother Bradford left college 12 years ago with big dreams and no plan. We have all watched with concern as he wasted his potential on some pipe dream in Seattle, too proud to admit his failure and accept our help. He lifted the manila envelope dramatically. Out of love and concern, I took it upon myself to hire a professional to assess Bradford's true situation. I had hoped we might use this information to stage an intervention, to help him get his life back on track before it is too late. My mother gasped softly. My father's expression hardened. Various cousins, aunts, and uncles leaned forward with undisguised interest. What I found, Anthony continued, was even worse than I feared, and I believe we as a family must confront this reality together. With theatrical flair, Anthony opened the envelope and began distributing identical bound reports to everyone in the room. "Please take a moment to review this information. I think you will find it as disturbing as I did." I maintained a neutral expression as I accepted my copy, already knowing what it contained. The room fell silent as pages turned, and then one by one heads lifted with expressions of shock, confusion, and disbelief. Because what Anthony's expensive investigation had uncovered was not a story of failure, but undeniable success. The report contained detailed information about Preston Secure's $300 million valuation. Photos of my 6,000-square-foot waterfront home on Lake Washington, documentation of my meetings with tech industry leaders, screenshots of articles profiling my innovative security protocols that now protected data for over 20 Fortune 500 companies, evidence of my 8-figure net worth and strategic investments across the tech sector. Anthony, still standing by the fireplace, had not yet looked at his own copy. His triumphant expression faltered as he registered the reactions around the room. "I do not understand," my mother finally said, breaking the silence. "Bradford, this says you founded a major cybersecurity company." "This cannot be accurate," Anthony insisted, finally glancing down at the report. His face paled as he flipped through the pages. "There must be some mistake." "No mistake," I said quietly, speaking for the first time. "That is exactly what I do." "But you said you worked in tech support," my father interjected, his voice a mixture of confusion and something that sounded almost like hope. "I did at first. Then I built something more." Anthony was frantically turning pages now, his composure cracking. "If this were true, why would you keep it secret? Why drive a Toyota to a family gathering when you could afford any car you wanted? Why let us believe you were struggling all these years?" The room hung on my response. This was the moment of truth I had both dreaded and longed for. I looked around at my family, truly seeing them perhaps for the first time, as they were finally seeing me. "I wanted to know if who I was mattered more to this family than what I owned or what titles I held," I said simply. Year after year I got my answer. Anthony's face flushed red. "This is absurd. If you were really successful, you would have told us. This has to be some kind of elaborate deception, perhaps illegal activity or borrowed money. Every detail in that report can be verified," I replied calmly. "Your investigator was quite thorough. He found my corporate filings, my property records, even my charitable foundation for students with learning disabilities like the ADHD none of you ever noticed I had." My mother began to cry. My father looked as though he had been struck. The room erupted into chaos as relatives peppered me with questions about my company, my home, whether I knew this celebrity or that tech billionaire. Anthony slammed his copy of the report down on the coffee table. "This was a private family matter," he snapped. "You had no right to turn it into some kind of twisted test. And you had no right to investigate me," I countered. "Yet here we are." "I was concerned about you," he insisted, though his expression told a different story. "No," I said, rising from my seat. "You were threatened by the possibility that I might be happy, despite not following the path you deemed the only acceptable one. You wanted evidence of my failure to validate your own choices." Anthony stormed out of the room, Catherine hurrying after him with their children in tow. My shell-shocked parents remained staring at me as if seeing a stranger. In many ways, they were. "Why did you never tell us?" my father asked finally. "When have you ever been interested in anything about my life unless it reflected well on you?" I responded the question holding decades of hurt. As the evening disintegrated into awkward questions and attempts at reconciliation that felt too little too late, I made my excuses and returned to my assigned guest room. By morning, I had checked into a hotel in the city, needing space to process what had happened and what would come next. 3 months passed after the Christmas revelation. Spring brought cherry blossoms to the streets of Seattle, and a strange new reality to my relationship with my family. In the days following the disastrous reunion, my phone had exploded with messages. Anthony sent a terse email suggesting we coordinate our stories for the extended family, as if my success were something to be managed like a PR crisis. My mother called daily, alternating between tearful apologies and excited questions about whether I could get them tickets to meet Elon Musk. My father sent a formal letter typed and signed expressing his pride in my entrepreneurial achievements and suggesting several investment opportunities we might explore together. What none of them seemed to understand was that this was never about money or success. It was about being seen and valued for who I was, not what I had accomplished. In February, Anthony flew to Seattle unannounced, appearing at my company headquarters with a business proposal. "We could merge your security expertise with my financial connections," he suggested, over coffee in my corner office, which was notably less ostentatious than his own. Preston Brothers could be a powerhouse. "That is not why I built this company," I told him. "Then why did you?" he asked, genuinely perplexed. "Because I loved the work. Because I believed in what I was creating. Because success for me was never about impressing others." He left without understanding our fundamental disconnect as wide as ever. In March, my parents made their first trip to Seattle. I showed them my home, my offices, my life that had been invisible to them for so long. My mother marveled at everything, taking photos to show her friends. My father assessed property values and growth potential, still viewing the world through the lens of assets and liabilities. Over dinner on their final night, we had our first honest conversation in perhaps our entire relationship. "We failed you," my mother admitted, surprising me with her directness. "We were so focused on a specific vision of success that we could not see you were forging your own path." "You were always comparing me to Anthony," I said. "Do you know what that does to a child?" "We thought we were motivating you," my father replied, "pushing you to achieve your potential. By making me feel like I was never good enough." The silence that followed acknowledged what words could not. After they left, I made 2 important decisions. First, I would maintain boundaries with my family, while leaving the door open for genuine relationship should they ever truly want one. Second, I would expand my foundation for students with learning disabilities, focusing on identifying ADHD in children before they internalized the shame I had carried for so many years. The months that followed brought unexpected changes. Anthony struggled visibly with no longer being the most successful Preston, his identity, so wrapped up in that distinction that he seemed lost without it. Our parents made awkward but sincere efforts to connect with me, asking questions about my interests rather than just my business for the first time. More meaningful to me were the relationships forming in my present life. I began mentoring young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds, finding purpose in helping others avoid the obstacles I had faced. Through this program, I met Eliza, a brilliant software developer, starting her second company after selling her first. She saw me for who I was, not what I owned, and the connection between us grew naturally into something that felt like it might last. Perhaps the most unexpected outcome was the freedom I felt. For years, I'd been carrying the weight of my family's disapproval, even as I pretended it did not matter. Now, with everything in the open, I no longer had anything to prove or disprove. I could simply live. The lesson in all of this was not about money or success. It was about authenticity, about the courage to live according to your own values, rather than others' expectations. About recognizing that sometimes the people who should support you the most are incapable of doing so, and that is their limitation, not yours. Anthony's private investigator had intended to expose my failure, but instead revealed something far more important: the failure of our family to value connection over accomplishment, authenticity over appearance, love over status. That was the real revelation. Have you ever been underestimated by the people closest to you? How did you handle it, and what did you learn from the experience? Share your story in the comments below. If this journey of breaking free from others' expectations resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of authentic living. Consider sharing this video with someone who might be struggling to find their own path while facing pressure to conform. Thank you for listening. And remember that true success comes not from proving others wrong, but from having the courage to live your own truth.